And it's Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and a Shreveport family says they are now finding out the death of their brother, which was presented to them as a suicide, was actually a murder. KSLA's Dominique Ben spoke to Army veteran Sean Reed's family about how this revelation has shaken them.
Sean Reed served 10 years in the United States Army. After he retired from the military, he took a job in Louisville, Kentucky. The 2009 Captain Shreve graduate was living his best life, or so his family thought.
8 days after burying his brother, his older brother shot and killed on August 28th, 26-year-old Army veteran Sean Reed left the Florida home he shared with his wife, and neighbors said he seemed broken. Then, in the early hours of September 7th, in the St. Denis neighborhood of Louisville, Kentucky, Sean was found dead inside his bedroom, brought down by a blast from a 12-gauge shotgun. His wife, Aleshia Reed, sat in the front row at the funeral, weeping, hugging his family, calling them daily, consoling them as though she had lost the love of her life. The grief looked real, but in the quiet that followed, something didn't add up. The shotgun wasn't near his body, items in the bedroom were shattered, and the medical examiner concluded the wound could not have been self-inflicted. Before we go further, I noticed that 75% of you watching aren't subscribed. Think about that. You're watching real people's lives ripped apart, the truth trying to come out, yet you haven't even hit that subscribe button to stand with them. If you're brave enough to keep going, subscribe to True Crime 911, because the truth only survives when someone is willing to keep it alive. And if you still won't subscribe, drop a comment now and tell us why not. We'll wait. Before the tragedy that shattered the Reed family, Sean and Aleshia Reed painted a picture of what many would call a normal life. But beneath the surface, there were hidden fractures that only the closest people truly saw. Sean was a man defined by loyalty to his siblings, to his past, and to his family. His older brother's death just a week before his own left deep wounds. According to his family, he was devastated by that loss. Sean had served in the U.S. Army, and though he had moved to Louisville, Kentucky after his service, his roots in grief and family ran deep. Aleshia Reed, 33 at the time of the incident, lived with Sean in their home on Teakwood Circle in the St. Denis neighborhood of Louisville, Kentucky. To the outside world, they were just another couple, married, building a home, facing life's ups and downs together. Neighbors did not report constant public arguments. Instead, it seemed like a stable, peaceful household. To his family, though, Sean was more than just stable. He was caring, genuine, a man who carried the weight of his brother's murder, a trauma he didn't hide, but one that he didn't broadcast either. His siblings, who called themselves 5 hearts with one mic, referred to each other often in terms of closeness and shared history. Aleshia was often at the center of that family's healing, or so they believed. After Sean's brother died, she told his family that Sean was utterly crushed by the loss. She comforted him, supported him, or so the story went. With Sean reeling from his brother's death, she was the person he leaned on. But even in their most tender moments, some in the family sensed a tension that wasn't quite right. It wasn't the kind of tension that showed up in loud fights or dramatic confrontations. Rather, it was subtle, a tightness in Sean's voice when he spoke about grief, a guardedness in how Aleshia responded. On the surface, they were in love. In their private life, though, the grief from Sean's loss hung over them like a shadow. And for a close-knit family that had already lost one brother, that shadow was more than just sorrow. It was a warning sign. Little did they know, in the early morning hours of September 7th, the quiet calm of their life would be shattered. If this were your family, would you accept the suicide story? Or would you fight, even if nobody believed you? Most people look away. If you're not one of them, subscribe now. If you are, then tell us in the comments why indifference is easier.
Was and how much he loved his family. He would have never put us through the hurt again after just losing one brother to take his own life.
Just days before his own death, Sean Reed faced a heartbreak his family never fully recovered from: the murder of his older brother. According to his wife, Aleshia, Sean was devastated by that loss. His siblings say the brother's death hit him like a freight train. Sean had grown up in a tight-knit family, one that called themselves 5 Heartbeats with one mic. They had already survived the deaths of their parents when he was a child, and now another brother is gone. As Sean struggled with grief, Aleshia stepped in. She told his family she was doing everything she could to support him, to be his rock during the worst moments. But inside the family, questions began to stir. Some wondered if Aleshia's role was only that of caregiver, or something more calculated. To his sisters, Sean was the kind of man who wouldn't willingly pull the trigger on himself. If you knew who Sean was and how much he loved his family, he would have never put us through the hurt again, after just losing one brother, to take his own life. The family's grief was raw. Lola Morris, Sean's older sister, and someone he called Mama, described how they supported each other, leaned into one another. They planned a funeral, held memorials, tried to make sense of the violence that stole their brother from them. But even through all the sorrow, there was a fear. Something about Aleshia's story didn't quite line up. And while everyone believed he was grieving, something far worse was unfolding behind closed doors. In the late hours of September 6th, on the quiet block of Teakwood Circle in the St. Denis neighborhood, Sean and Aleshia Reed's home carried an uneasy stillness, the kind of tension you can feel before a storm breaks. Neighbors say they heard nothing out of the ordinary, but in the walls of that house, the night was anything but peaceful. Just hours before the tragedy, Sean reportedly made a few phone calls. Family members later recalled that he sounded distant, less like the man they knew, and more like someone carrying a weight he couldn't put down. While there's no public record of the exact content of those calls, his loved ones believe they were part of a final attempt to reach out, to make sense of the grief after his brother's death, and to lean on Aleshia in ways he hadn't before. Aleshia's version of the evening was different. In later interviews and during legal proceedings, she claimed the night was calm and that the two of them were alone in the house when it all went wrong. But investigators would come to question parts of her story, including what she said she heard, what she saw, and whether a struggle actually took place in that room. Inside the bedroom, according to police reports, something unsettled had already shifted. When officers arrived shortly after 1:20 a.m. on September 7th, they found broken items strewn across the floor, evidence, they said, of a struggle. The shotgun used in the shooting was located in a corner far from where Sean's body lay. Investigators believe Aleshia was the only person in the house at the time of the shooting. For those closest to Sean, his final hours felt like a tragedy in slow motion. The grief over his brother's killing, raw and fresh, appeared to hang in his every word, his every move. Whether he confided in Aleshia that night or kept his pain locked inside remains uncertain. But something powerful was building, something deeper than loss. As the clock ticked toward morning, the Reed home felt like a powder keg, unstable, loaded with grief, regret, and unsaid words. Whatever happened in that bedroom, someone didn't want Sean to speak ever again. At approximately 1:21 a.m. on September 7th, Louisville Metro Police received a frantic 911 call from Aleshia Reed, reporting that her husband had been shot inside their home on Teakwood Circle. In her voice, listeners can hear a mixture of fear, confusion, and genuine grief. The kind of sorrow that sounds like someone who thinks their world is falling apart. When first responders arrived, Aleshia met them at the door, guiding officers down the hallway to the couple's bedroom. She directed them to where Sean Reed lay, slumped on the floor. According to the arrest citation, the shotgun used in the shooting was not nearby. It was later found in the corner of the room. Paramedics and police quickly assessed the scene, but initially believed Aleshia's story, that Sean had shot himself. The emotional 911 call, her tears, her plea for help, to them it appeared consistent with a tragic suicide, not a violent homicide. But even in those first chaotic moments, some signs didn't add up. Broken items scattered around the room, evidence of a struggle, and the placement of the shotgun. Those early impressions, powerful as they were, would soon be challenged by investigators and eventually overturned once the full forensic picture came to light. The funeral for Sean Reed was held just days after his death, a somber affair attended by family, friends, and neighbors. Aleshia Reed sat in the front row, her face streaked with tears. She hugged grieving family members, whispered words of comfort, and made calls to Sean's siblings and parents every day afterward. On the surface, it was the image of a devastated widow mourning the love of her life. For those around her, Aleshia's sorrow seemed genuine. Family members clung to the notion that she shared their grief, that she had lost Sean in the same way they had. She cried, she sobbed, she prayed, every action reinforcing the narrative that this was a tragic suicide. Yet some within the family began to notice subtle inconsistencies, little things, a glance that seemed calculated, a phrase that didn't match the emotion in her voice, or her willingness to discuss the funeral details repeatedly. It was as if every interaction was measured, every tear perfectly timed. While outwardly mourning, Aleshia's actions would later come under scrutiny, revealing the first signs of a performance that masked something darker. But grief has limits. Guilt, however, behaves differently. It wasn't long before Sean Reed's family began to raise questions. Sean's sisters and brothers recalled details that didn't make sense. How could a man grieving his brother's death suddenly take his own life in such a violent and unusual way? Why did the shotgun end up in a corner, far from where Sean's body lay? Forensic investigators started to examine the scene with fresh eyes. The trajectory of the shotgun blast did not match a self-inflicted wound. Bruises and small marks suggested there may have been a struggle in the bedroom. The timeline Aleshia gave didn't align with evidence gathered from the house and neighbor statements. Each inconsistency planted seeds of doubt in the minds of the family and investigators alike. Was this truly a desperate act of a grieving husband, or had someone carefully staged the scene to look that way? The turning point in the investigation came with a single phone call. The medical examiner had completed the autopsy on Sean Reed and found details that could not be ignored. The trajectory of the shotgun blast, the angle of entry, and the distance from the barrel to the body all pointed to one shocking conclusion. This wound could not have been self-inflicted. Investigators reviewed the crime scene again. The placement of the gun in the corner, far from Sean's body, combined with the broken items scattered across the bedroom floor, shattered the initial narrative. The evidence made it impossible to maintain the theory of suicide. The medical examiner's words were clear. This was no suicide. Someone else pulled the trigger. For Sean's family, these findings validated the unease they had felt since the funeral. For detectives, it marked a critical turning point. A simple truth had emerged from the chaos of grief and confusion. The story Aleshia Reed had told was no longer believable, and now, for the first time, detectives begin to suspect the grieving widow. If you think this story is shocking now, imagine ignoring the warning signs in real life, missing the truth while someone suffers. Do you really want to stay on the sidelines? Hit that subscribe button for True Crime 911 and make sure justice is seen. If you don't, at least tell us in the comments why you're turning away from the truth. After the medical examiner's report, detectives went back to the Reed home with renewed focus. Every detail was re-examined, every corner of the bedroom scrutinized. Crime scene investigators noticed small but significant inconsistencies: broken picture frames, scattered personal items, and a disrupted bed that suggested a struggle may have taken place. Aleshia's story, which had been consistent in the immediate aftermath, began to shift under questioning. Times didn't match. Her description of where Sean had been when he was shot clashed with physical evidence. Detectives documented every discrepancy, noting that what once seemed like a straightforward tragedy was now layered with contradictions. Investigators began to piece together a new narrative, a domestic scene that may have been staged to look like a suicide rather than the spontaneous act Aleshia had claimed. As detectives delved deeper, one of the most alarming revelations came from Aleshia herself. She admitted to moving the shotgun after the shooting. What initially seemed like an innocent action to clear the scene now raised serious red flags. Forensic teams analyzed fingerprints on the weapon, blood spatter patterns, and the gun's final placement in the room. The evidence suggested the positioning was not natural for a suicide scenario. The act of moving the weapon introduced questions of intent, of deception, and of conscious effort to mislead investigators. Every detail pointed to one inescapable conclusion: the scene had been manipulated. The staged arrangement of objects, the broken items, and the placement of the shotgun were all pieces of a puzzle that no longer fit the story Aleshia had told. But why move a gun unless you're hiding something? As the investigation unfolded, detectives began looking beyond the immediate evidence to the life Sean and Aleshia Reed shared behind closed doors. Neighbors had seen little, but the family started revealing details of arguments, tension, and unspoken conflict that had taken place over the years. Money had been a source of stress. Decisions about bills, purchases, and lifestyle created friction. But the deeper concern was control. Sources close to the family suggested that Aleshia had a strong influence over Sean's decisions, sometimes pressuring him in ways he seemed uncomfortable with. There were moments of psychological manipulation, subtle but powerful, that may have gone unnoticed by outsiders.
And then there were the secrets no one saw, arguments behind closed doors, unspoken resentments, and financial or personal dealings that were hidden from the family. All of it began to form a picture of a household in which tensions were simmering, and the events of September 7th were no longer just a tragic coincidence. By mid-October 2025, law enforcement had gathered enough evidence to act. Aleshia Reed was charged with murder in connection to her husband Sean's death. The charge included a domestic violence component, emphasizing the control and tension investigators believed existed in their marriage. For Sean's family, the arrest was a bittersweet moment. Heartbreak remained. Sean was gone, and nothing could bring him back. Yet there was vindication in knowing the story of his death would not be buried under claims of suicide. Public statements from the family reflected their sense of relief, mixed with grief that the investigation was finally moving forward. Despite the arrest, the legal battle was far from over. Aleshia Reed maintained no confession, and her defense team began preparing for trial. The case would go before a grand jury, and as of the latest reports, no final verdict had been reached. For Sean's family, justice remained an ongoing battle. Every hearing, every procedural motion became another chapter in the story of a man whose death was far more complicated than anyone had imagined. The fight for truth, accountability, and closure continued, a reminder that even in the aftermath of a tragedy, the search for answers can be long and uncertain. While the law takes its course, the questions linger. What really happened in that bedroom, and how much of the truth will ever be known? Stories like Sean Reed's aren't easy to tell. Every fact, every interview, every piece of evidence takes hours, days of careful research, cross-checking sources, and piecing together a story that deserves to be heard. I put my heart into every video to make sure the truth reaches you. So if you care about justice, truth, and real stories, hit that subscribe button right now. Don't just scroll by. Your subscription tells us you value the work and the lives behind these stories. And if you still won't subscribe, tell me why. Drop a comment and explain why you're turning away from the truth. I want to hear it because every voice matters, even the ones who look the other way.